people have the view that science is conducted in a way that is totally separate from our interests, what we care about, and societal pressures. In fact, many people think that in order for science to be objective, it can't be influenced by these factors. However, the pursuit of science is influenced by these social factors, and that's a good thing. In fact, when we come to understand what it really means for science to be objective, we'll see that this is not at all incompatible with the importance of values. The idea that science is practiced in a way that is totally separate from what we care about is called the value-free ideal of science. It is the view that scientists leave their values and biases at the door when they practice science, and they adopt a totally objective perspective and don't let the things that they care about influence their scientific research. There is a lot that is correct about this view, but the value-free ideal of science is still wrong. Scientific research is guided by values in a number of important ways, and so science itself embodies those values. But as long as we're careful about how this plays out, it doesn't need to undermine the objectivity of scientific knowledge. There are a few simple ways in which we see values influencing how scientific research is carried out. There are ethical codes, and in some cases, laws that prevent scientists from doing certain kinds of research. For example, any research that is conducted on human subjects, like clinical trial of new medicine, must be approved by a review board to make sure that there are no ethical issues with the way in which subjects are treated. Likewise, there are ethical standards that govern the ways in which research on animal subjects ought to be carried out. These ethical standards exist because we, as a society, decided that it was more important to value the autonomy and lives of human and animal subjects than it was to allow scientists to conduct whatever research they wanted. These ethical standards are a simple example of how values do, in fact, influence scientific research. And I hope you'll agree that they're a good example of how values should influence scientific research. It's also clear that ethical standards like these won't undermine the objectivity of the research that is conducted, though they may limit the kinds of research that can be carried out. Another way in which values influence scientific research comes in the form of funding. Nowadays, many scientific research projects are so large and complex and require such specialized equipment and expertise that they must be funded by someone other than the scientists themselves. Sometimes it'll be a university that funds research, but often it's governments that fund research. And in some cases, large groups of international researchers will get funding from many government and non-government sources to carry out major research projects. For example, think of large astronomical observatories, the International Space Station, or the Large Hadron Collider. Government funding, of course, comes from public sources like income tax, and it is a limited funding source. So, how that money is spent is an important consideration everyone should have some say in. If we, as a society, decide that medical research is higher priority than fundamental physics research, our science funding agencies should reflect that. This won't have an impact on the objectivity of science that actually gets carried out, but may influence the kinds of research projects that actually get done. Both of these examples of how values influence science operate at what you might call the institutional level. Funding agencies, ethical review panels, and large international research collaborations are all institutions. From these examples, it's easy to see how the values that have been embodied in those institutions can influence how science is carried out. But individual scientists' values can also play a role in how science is done. A scientist is a person who decided to pursue a career in science. Scientists usually have advanced degrees in their specific scientific area. So for many, these decisions to be a scientist and what kind of scientist they decide to be happens when they are, say, in college or even earlier. And just like anyone deciding what career path they want to follow, those decisions will be influenced by the values of the individual. Maybe a scientist decided to go into biology because she was good at it and got good grades in biology classes. Or maybe she wanted to get into biomedical research because she felt like she could make a positive difference by pursuing a career in science. Or maybe somebody decided to be an engineer because of the prestige associated with the career or the possibility of making money. All of these are legitimate reasons why someone might choose to become a scientist, and they are examples of a person's values influencing their choice of scientific area and their choice to become a scientist in the first place. Values also influence what scientists choose to research, and just like funding for research, this shapes what scientific knowledge is produced. Scientists concerned about health outcomes in underserved communities may go into public health. Scientists fascinated by the outer reaches of the universe may get into astrophysics, and so on and so on. And as individual scientists make these kinds of decisions and influence the decisions of other scientists, this role for values ends up shaping the nature of scientific knowledge. Different scientists with different concerns and different life experiences will make different choices about what kind of research to pursue. This is one of the reasons it's important for science to include scientists with many different backgrounds and different life experiences. But again, none of these examples undermine the objectivity of scientific research itself. The objectivity of science is a result of scientific methods and institutional structures that ensure values don't improperly influence scientific data or conclusions drawn from the data. The mistake of the value-free ideal of science is to conflate the influence of values on science with non-objectivity. As these examples show, values do have a place in science, and they can coexist with the pursuit of objectivity in scientific research.